Yes, you read the title correctly. I do layer my 808s sometimes, and I find it to be a very effective way to get a bit more character and aggression out of an 808 without going too crazy on the post-processing. So I'm going to show you a couple snippets where I do use this technique within the context of a beat, and then I'm going to show you the techniques that I use to layer my 808s. So there's this video by SIKKY'S that he made around January of this year where he shows himself layering a saw wave with the 808, and it sounded really good. So that's when I kind of started exploring the idea of layering 808s in a lot of different creative ways. So right now I only have a Spins 808, just a typical one. And we're just gonna pull up Serum real quick. And basically the way he was doing it is you want to obviously have it as the same note as the 808. And you want to bring it down an octave below what the 808 actually is. So like probably right around here. And then you're going to want to start adjusting the sustain so you kind of have it tail off along with the 808. And as you can tell, it's already pretty buzzy, so you'll probably want to cut back on that. So I'm just going to add a low pass filter real quick. So it kind of gives it that crunch. You can hear it kind of like oscillating at a lower level. Sounds really good so far. And then one thing he did was add noise as well. But I think the key to using the noise is adding distortion after the fact. So what I like to do is I'll just go in here and add distortion. And you can explore with all the different types. I like to use diode. And as you can hear, it kind of gives it this like blown out sound. If I take it off, you know, you can kind of hear the difference. And then from here, you just kind of want to level it to taste. You can also start messing around with different noise and different wavetables if you even wanted to. I find that usually the simpler wavetables are usually the most effective, especially a saw wave, because you know there's a pretty equal harmonic content across the frequency spectrum. That was when I started exploring with the idea of like how can I use other things to kind of layer on top of this. Obviously there's no limits to what you can layer as long as it sounds good, but one method that I found that works really well is to use a Neuro bass. And if you don't know what a Neuro bass is, it's basically based off of Neuro drum and bass. It's kind of this subgenre of drum and bass where they basically use really basic wave shapes and then they distort it and then automate filters and then distort it and automate filters, and you kind of get this like crazy blown out respace with like a lot of expression. So here's a good example of what a Neuro bass actually sounds like. And as you can hear, there's a lot of like crunchy texture at the top, and it kind of just is constantly moving and it sounds really organic. So one thing I like to do is bring it in here, and you obviously want to make it the same key as your 808. And then as you can hear, there's like a whole bunch of different expressions. So I can actually go through this and find a different section if I wanted to. I think I might just keep it as it is right now. Increase the attack so you can kind of hear the transient of the original 808. And then you also want to kind of adjust the sustain and decay and all that and kind of have it match the 808. I'm actually gonna do a different... Here's one. So there we go, we kind of got something so far. Another thing I like to do is add the Ableton saturator, and you can basically kind of crank these together. Another thing you might want to consider is making sure that there's not as much low end on the respace or the Neuro bass. So that way, you know, the 808's kind of doing the heavy lifting and then you're just kind of taking the top end. Like that. And then you can kind of crank this. Another thing I like to do though is within the Ableton saturator, there's this bass down here. And basically what this kind of describes is that when I turn this down, the saturator doesn't affect the low end as equally as it does the high end. So if you hear how I have it normally, if I exaggerate it, then it's going to distort the low end before it does the high end. So as you can hear, as it goes up, it's distorted even harder. But if I lower it, then that means that the high end will saturate easier than the low end will. And that's kind of the general concept of what I like to do when layering my 808s. And you can even take this a step further by taking that Neuro bass and further processing it to give it a bit of a different effect. Like for example, in this beat, if you listen to the 808, you can hear that I have obviously the original 808. There's a slight bit of distortion on it, but nothing too crazy. It's a standard 808. And then on top of that, I have this, Neuro bass. I'm gonna show you without the post-processing. And then after post-processing, and then layered, obviously I have the saturator going again. But for this, I actually used Serum Effects, and I used a flanger, and I have it slowly automating over 2 bars. And then on top of that, I have a chorus to give it a bit more width. On top of that, I have an EQ, so it's not conflicting with the low end of the 808. And it also looks like I'm doing a low pass filter as well to kind of cut out that highs and make sure that it's not conflicting with any of the hi-hats or anything like that. And then all together, it ends up sounding like this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. I know people are going to be foaming at the mouth, like commenting, telling me how I'm doing everything wrong and that I'm breaking these imaginary rules of music. But realistically, you can do whatever you want, especially when it comes to sound design. I think there's no rules to this. Just do what sounds good. And, if this doesn't, float your boat, then just don't do it.